normally so pleasant. Till you hear the truth, and you start finding out that some things that are pleasant may not be so pleasant. It kind of matters in the context. It kind of matters what goes on, and what you're told, and what the people that tell you stuff believe. Well, I try to get behind the woodshed, just tell you the principles, let you go work it out. Don't take really too much of an opinion. Just instruct you on how to see things that I think most everyone is missing, whether or not they understand that or not. And it can be, many different types of, if you will, realities are provable. And it's really only one reality. It's the one that we're dealing with. But there's many, many dimensions and factions within this. And I suspect it's all working from the fallen nature of people more than not. And then there's this odd twist that says, I'll take that and I'll command that a condition that may not be the truth, but that I can believe in. And you just believe in it, and you don't go look at, and you will not look at anything new. You will not try to practice it. You will not try to do anything new. You will just exist in what you thought you knew. And I've found over the years, what we've been knowing, and as we become more knowledgeable, well, that's another thing that's interesting. We lull ourselves with the knowledge we think we have. And we forget that all that knowledge means nothing until we apply it somewhere, which means we have to care enough to go in something to go work with it and get whatever the problem is that we see solved. And I suspect, I say it in the context of a problem, because I see most people are in problems. We don't seem to live in the what we could see and give to ourselves is a much better reality and place to exist. We can talk about all the advancements that we do, but it ends up not, you look around and the reality is it doesn't really come out. So try to show us that there's a methods for keeping us down. And we can continue to complain about them, or we can decide to really understand what those are and come to terms with it, and decide to do something about that without excuse, any excuse at all. Today is BTW RLM 301, BTWRLM 301. Who wants to ever add that little part in the search engine in the future? You might be able to find the content through there, reallibertymedia.com. That it's, as long as the Grimner's running that website, we'll be able to put that stuff there and have the archives, and then all the links I'll talk about. You can do your own research. And I only speak, to me, the answer's in a lot of the title, because the news is, what we call news is notice. There's really no fake news in a way. It's all giving you a notice. And if you know how to parse through that, it's pretty quick to go through and pick things up. And then if you want to know a little bit more, depending on what your interest is, you can get into the body of it. And then you still have to parse through all the misinformation, which seemed to come through a couple times again, in particular with specific information that, like 5G and then these things that come down in smartphones, and there's always that misinformation that's out there, and so you really have to learn to discern. And we're told we're going to be in a time of deception. I think that's of all ages, not just now. And so we have to know who's defrauding us and who's deceiving us. And then we have the obligation not just to witness it, but to stop it, because it's just an ongoing crime. So, I mean, I wish everyone just would understand that and start to embrace at least some of the things I'm talking about behind the woodshed weekly. That there are these remedies, but the problem is those remedies are also a bit obstructed, and it's going to take the mass of the people to out it all. A few people doing this is not going to work. A few old guys ain't going to cut it. I can just see that now. I made a mistake in believing that those of us coming into the end of our lives by two or three decades would be the most experienced and insightful to take action to stop the nonsense I was seeing coming up through my life. The witness, I could see the big conundrum in the world that was happening. We were promised a whole bunch of stuff, and you could see it was there, but you also could tell it just wasn't going to happen. And I felt that over the since the 90s and my research there, that we're going to come to a time as we get older, the older ones here, the elders, are going to be able to have the insight to fix this. And my mistake was in believing that could really happen. Now, I guess it could really happen, but the reality is it's not going to happen. I'll just put it that way. And you can change my mind anytime if you want. Change my mind that all of us elder folk are going to do a darn thing to stop any of this. And so it looks like it's really, as I've said before, we're trying to be, I was hoping we would be an example for the younger ones. And that could have been any age. I don't know if the millennials will actually work in here. There's the borderline millennials that might, but most of them won't. You see what happens with you can see their mind control working. It's just distraction and destruction, and victimization. And so but I'm understanding as I listen to people that this so-called Generation Z is coming up, and they're in some part are not having it. These are all the teeny bopper, we would call it teeny boppers now. They're not having a lot of this. The problem is they're not old enough to understand the ramifications. And I talked to you a long time ago and I said, it's possible if my archives ever exist in time in the future. I'm actually speaking to those that are living in a prison, in a cage. They don't know how it got there. They just know they're living in it. And they don't have a clue because they've never been given the information that they're going to need at least a touchstone on how to unravel or untie or get rid of, not really untie. The answer to the Gordian knot is to not untie it and worry about it, is to just get rid of it. Not put yourself as a subject to it. That my broadcasts may be, hopefully in the future, at least a touchstone for those that don't think they know so much, but find out they need to do so much. And that's the whole point about this. You need to do. I don't care what age it's going to be. We need to do. And I'm really starting to see that I doubt that those folks around my age and my generation before and after, I don't know that we're going to do it. We have the opportunity to, but I don't know that's going to happen. So you can those of you that disagree with me, you can change my mind. Go ahead and change my mind. I'll be happy to see that I'm wrong in that. But it's not looking like that. So it's possible that I'm speaking to the future. Those that find themselves in the cage, I told you this a long time ago, they're going to be in a cage that they know is a cage and they won't be able to understand how it got there. And yet the tools are right there if they were just to have it in order to do what they need to do to stop it. It's not going to be easy at all. You think we can't do it now. You wait till it gets down, when everything gets locked down, like I keep telling you is coming, you see it, you're like standing on the tracks watching the train bear down and okay, well, there's a train and I don't like it, and I don't like the noise, and I don't like the smoke, and I don't like this, and I don't like that, and then the train hits you, and then the next generation gets it. So we have an example to meet, and I don't think we're meeting it. Now, there's a few that are trying to meet something, trying to give an example, and I hope that information that becomes worthy extends itself in time and lends a hand, hopefully, because I don't know how else it's going to do. I don't know how else this gets done. Either society goes into the stinking abyss and becomes this controlled system, and your energy, like the Matrix is not a movie, the energy won't look like pods necessarily, although there's a line of thought that looks like it will perfect that as well, or could. But you all become the epitome of what the pod people were. Your lives are sucked like the parasite the government is, and those that get into government to do so. They suck from your life and they take it down and they destroy it, and you don't ever understand how that's being done. And so I tried to bring some of these principles. So hopefully today we would do something, but I don't even know if that's going to happen. So I'm starting to wonder what my utility in that regard is, and I'm having to readjust what I want to do. I don't think I'm of the mind to take up the new tools that the Generation Z so-called is using in order to communicate certain things. And the concepts I have to offer are certainly not within things like a 15-second video. I don't think, but that's also someone else maybe has to look at this. So I don't know how the communication line will reach back there today, but somehow those of you that are working with this may have to start, and I'm just going to offer this up, may have to start to understand your focus may have to turn to 2 generations removed, and hope the mineral generation doesn't forget, because if they forget, you're going to have enough information out there that so they can't forget, but not enough to really speak to them because they're not listening. They're victimized. And then you're going to get the ones coming up that just won't put up with it, but don't know how to resolve what they're in. And if that's the case, that we're seeing Generation Z so-called not having it, but going off on their own, they're They're doing it in an immature way now because they're not old enough to understand it. But there's going to have to be an example in the future. If we can't do it today, in the generation around me, front and back, older and younger, if we're not going to do it, this thing is really over the edge, and we can only hope for a future. We're not going to be here to see that. We're going to hope for a future. And those people, if you have any care, they're going to need to see a guideline. And the problem I see with that is everyone thinks they know a lot, and I look around how it works out, and everyone's still fighting out what's going on. And we're not focusing on the actual cause. We're always focused on the effect. And so that's a bad lesson that we're made. Well, when we leave, it's not going to be a lesson we're going to learn and have any consequence to. We're just going to leave. And we're going to leave a place, the stinking abyss for the younger people to figure out. Now, I don't like that, but I don't know what else to do about that. Not up to me at that point. So we can decide, we have other reasons to decide. I'm really kind of wondering what I do behind the woodshed relative to people that I thought we would be a powerhouse. It's not happening, and so I'm wondering, okay, where do I focus now? I don't even know if I can focus there, but I can at least think about it. And I can convey that to those of you that are stepping up and doing whatever you can. Look into, not only it's like a lessoning, it's like a teaching. You don't just do what you need to do. You set it up so it's an example, a lesson for others to learn to do it that way if it's working, given it's working. And you have to find those ways. So that's the only product you produce for people to see is nothing that can be tainted, nothing can be contorted, and everything, it points to the truth. Again, as I said, I've said this for years and years and years with the mining districts and the mining associations and what we do. We don't have the luxury of being wrong once. And I'm hoping I haven't found anybody to counter this, so I'm going to say it this way. I haven't been shown I've been wrong once. And I'm not meaning on the menial stuff. I'm talking the important things. Yeah, I misspeak every once in a while, but it's not on the really important things, and I listen for that. I wish I had said maybe something a little clearer, maybe a different word pops out, maybe I misspoke a month for a week or that stuff. That's incidental. When it gets down to the important stuff, I don't think I've been wrong once. And if I'm not wrong once and people aren't taking that up, we have a serious problem. In the future, the people in the future are going to have a serious problem trying to figure out what to do for themselves. And these people that are doing this are criminals, and they're going to get away with the crime. And that's the thing that irks me to no end. These people are easily demonstrably criminal, and we can't stop this? How weak, pathetic are we as a people? And I can use this globally. Yes, there's these little beacons and this and that pop up, but they're not enough. We tend to walk into the meat grinder, and then we tend to think that's the only thing we can do, and then we see the physical violence working out in the world because we're just incompetent. I think that's the bottom line. We're just incompetent. At some point, that reality will hit. But otherwise, if we haven't done everything any other way that doesn't require the violence, even in defense, we made a big mistake. And that revolutionary wheel will come back around over and over generationally until those people in the future can't. They just can't. They don't even know to. We see societies right now that are already doing that. They just agree with all this oppression, tyranny, whatever it is, because it's just the way it has to work. And that's really not the way I see it, and I can have it's not my opinion. I have a whole other line of factual, objective basis to point everyone to, that we at least should start there and move forward from the objective basis, the narrow path that we're told. As I told you last week, you better start painting a nice, bright line on your narrow path as well to keep very tight, because something's coming. It looks like something's finally appeared in the world, and we have a little bit of that maybe in the news here this last week. Before I go any further, I want to remind you all that Grimner is doing a lot of work. He's upgraded. For those of you that get over to the podcasts and the archive, he upgraded a player, and now I think I'm feeling I need to learn how to scrub and scratch and go into hip hop, because he's got this little vinyl, the Acme vinyl disc player. As a player, and on the player you have all these things you can do as well. And so it's a brand new player. It's pretty cool looking, and when you play it, you'll look like you're playing a little record now. The vinyl disc, I figure, is just the disc is your hard drive. But anyway, he put a little bit of work into that. That looks nice, and the page looks nice and clean. I hope those of you on mobiles can scroll through that more efficient than I think I've seen people try before. And no, this was not a Vine EL disc, not a vinyl disc. Vine EL disc. No, sorry, Vine. Vinny. So, trying to make upgrades on the website. Grimner's always working hard to do all that. I appreciate all his work there, and I hope it works out better for you. I don't have a mobile phone to find out how it works, so maybe those give us feedback. I did realize that some people were saying it was a little bit disconjointed, but I don't know how that new list, whether or not you get the player part, I don't know, but the player has now a little record player. It's kind of cool. But the list looks like it's a nice and clean list now, so maybe that'll come up better on your little phones. Also, again, talking with this elderly thing and information that you can have and the alt news issue, and whether or not, like I said, I'm kind of beyond media. I told you, these are notices to us, not news. And so I don't know where I fit. Yeah, we're on Real Liberty Media, but it's a media. It's not necessarily the news. It's a media like any other place that you would get a conduit for information. Now, hopefully, then you acquire knowledge through the application of the information, and then you gain power by applying the knowledge you gain. And hopefully, you're using what I'm using to guide you to get there, and then you take it on your own. I mean, this is your responsibility, ultimately. And you can turn away, or you can not discuss it, or you could not promote what I'm saying, or whatever, not share, not like, whatever. You can do all that, but I don't think I made a mistake in my conclusions on what I saw the reality being, as I could prove it in a black and white condition. Not my opinion on how I think things are supposed to be, or how I thought they were to be, what they are. And when you start analyzing these things for the purposes of, let's say, non-disclosure, or what they call transparency, which I've identified as the thing you look right through. You don't even see the enemy standing right in front of you. This thing becomes a whole lot more difficult to engage. That said, it's still an illusion. And they get you to try and buy into it. And that's how you defeat it. But you're going to need more than your opinion to do it. It's not, again, you're not your opinion of what the Constitution is. It's how is it working today and how you're not enjoying it, and what caused that disconnect. It's how you attack what caused the disconnect. And I've told you it's real easy to identify if you just step back and take a look at all this. But see, we do stuff for as much as I try to bring. Again, the truth may not be televised, but as I say in the Twitter, it's going to be broadcast behind a woodshed. And you can take that truth and you can disregard it or whatever, but that truth is going to sit there into the future, and it's sit there to inform you, and it's going to sit there to help you if you just go ahead and do your preliminary check. As I said, I'll send you to the path it looks like you think you need to do on any subject matter area that the so-called news is telling us to look at, and I will explain to you what you can find down there, and then you'll find all the rest of the stuff that I don't have time or didn't have time to go look in those subject matter areas. But because you made that important to you. I didn't make it important to you. And if you don't want to make something important to you, then I don't know what value that you are to yourself at some level. And I mean that spiritually or psychically or functionally. I don't know what to say to an absence. I just take notice. Again, the silence is what kills us. The silence is where the victory is taken against us. And counter that, our speaking improperly to others and spreading other news is also a problem. And this came up here, and again, this is all taken in context of the understanding that this whole media, so-called, this news we want to read is full of good and bad information, and we have to start to learn to discern. But they're pointing out now that in this group of folks, I thought we were going to stand up and do the right thing because we had the best insight and we had the best experience of the time, and we have the energy still. That some of us, we're not literally 1 foot in a grave. That we would be a powerhouse to be reckoned with. They called the baby boomers. I miss the baby boomers, but I'm right in there. And that group would do something when they went into retirement. We could fix a lot of this, but that's not happening. And yet, now they're coming out you see the power that's sitting there that they want to dissuade, and they're vilifying it right now with this little news, this notice to us, but we can take a different inference. Elderly conservatives spread the most fake news during 2016 election. Now, this thing is such a big deal for the liberal side that this electioneering 2016 election, they're continuing. It's 2019, and they're still talking about it. But now they want to blame somebody. They want to get to the facts of it, and they won't. None of these people will. And this is the other problem for us. We have to stay on the facts, again, that narrow path. They call the elderly conservatives spread fake news. Well, elderly includes, if you think elderly is the 65, they say that people over 65 and ultra-conservatives shared about 7 times more fake information masquerading as news on their social media site than younger adults, moderates, and super liberals during the 2016 election season, a new study finds. And so here's what experts say. But the 65 here, I've told you before, the word elderly, when they put it and they use it, that means everybody above age 46. That's when years and years ago they started to bring that word in. They started to identify people in news articles. If an elderly woman was accosted, an elderly man was this, and they were all 46 and 47 years old. And so they were shifting the consciousness way back when to now, but now they split it and they say 65 is elderly. It's not, folks. They're talking about everybody just above, maybe even into millennials, but just above millennials. I'm talking about functional millennials now. If you're 46 and older, they're talking about you. Now, you're going to say, no, that's not the case. The whole point is, well, how do you know if you don't know what's good news and bad news, so to speak, what's a story and what you don't? And I can say a lot of us don't know some of these stories are fake. They're completely fake. They were fabricated outright. The problem with this story is when you go into this, is this does tell the truth. We do send a lot of fake news around. And this is my main problem with a lot of stuff I see that comes my way. People want to pass information, and I look and say, but there's something wrong with this. And I don't mean this something is a question. I mean, I identify what the something is, and it could be in numerous things. I see this in the Twitter as well. Not looking at age, just looking at what people do. And there's a couple of reasons. In fact, I think this story this report, this notice to us, tells us, there's a professor that actually looked at this and doesn't believe that it's the reasons why ultra-conservatives or 65s pass fake news is. It's really more just telegraphing your gang membership. And I have a feeling you're sending this notice off. You're just saying this is what I generally believe. You haven't even looked at the facts generally. And I think that's really more of the story in this story. But the fact is when you look at who did the study, and they claim that no liberal, even super liberal, sent fake news, you have to look at what the study was. An academician who didn't tell you what they considered fake news, and these are the same people that will embrace climate change, which is even worse than fake news. It's a fraud. It's literally treason in the United States if officially put in. Why? If you look around, it's only voluntary. But people don't understand that. But they'll buy it and they'll pass it on. And these super liberals made no climate change links. They advance nothing to do with gender equality, with the lie about what equal rights is, with discrimination. But the liberals didn't present anything. The conservatives didn't expose what equal rights is. The alt media, the memifiers, didn't expose the tax is worse than theft. It's actually wrongful extortion. Nobody says this stuff. Everybody's passing fake news to my mind. And I say everybody in a general. And so I got a guy behind the woodshed tried to send out some information on Twitter to counter some of this stuff, but knowing full well I'm almost self-censoring because I can't get into it with all these people that want to send this information, that believe it's real, or want to make a point about it. Like, in other words, I believe in this gang's agreements. I believe I'm conservative, and this is what we do. MAGA, USA, save the whales, in which I was one of those guys until I found out it was a political thing. And this is way back. No, they didn't want my boat and my crew to go save a whale. They wanted my money. And then I found out that type of funding stream was integrated inside the states and through the federal government. And you don't even know that's what you're doing. And if you do, you're not calling it out, because that would end a lot of this stuff pretty quickly. We did. I said that we did in 2013. And we sued the purveyors of that, the protectors of that, which was the Republican Democratic Party and the Bar Association. And they defaulted. I don't know what else to tell you, folks. I really don't know what else to say. That should have been all that anybody ever needed to know. We don't need to get any more arguments. We got political parties that were set up to make division and a legal system that rules your life at every level. And we found they commit treason by their admission by default, and no one wants to look at that. I find that fascinating. I find that telltale as to what's going to happen in the society. I can predict where the society is going based on that failure for the people to rise up and say, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. Checks and balances, there are none. We don't have a government now. And then I bring up, why did I go to crickets, folks? They finally published that murder memo, where inside the contents of the appendix, they tell you that they decided to go to judicial expedience. To heck with the executive expedience. To heck with the judicial branch, even if regardless of whether it was good or bad or indifferent to law. And I said, there it is. If you aren't going to respond to that, you don't even know. You're looking the wrong way down a railroad track, and the next train's coming. That's what we're doing. And so I don't see us doing this. I don't see how this is working. But news is that the elderly and conservatives are spreading fake news, but the people who looked at the thing doesn't recognize what fraud and deception is to say that anybody who retweeted that was a violation. And so they're already targeting those you elders, all of you, everyone above 46 and up. It's all being targeted right now. And then we get this little report, and I asked Grimner a little bit about this thing, and he read it a little bit. I think we may have to keep an eye on this. I don't know quite what to do about it, but it's interesting to keep ahead of where the enemy is moving in order to infiltrate and interfere with your message. And I think this is for those of us that are trying to be a good example of what the real message is and what the action is around that. We have to be cognizant of these things. But they're targeting, and this is an interesting that the story before that was the elderly conservatives are passing fake news. Then the next story is that how a neocon-backed fact-checker, in quotes, fact-checker, plans to wage war on independent media. So you have special interests that are coming after certain aspects. And why would they be coming after independent media? Well, because that's what the title has been adopted by at least some people that are trying to give the right example. But it's actually been adopted by people who thought they were the truthiers, who are actually putting out. They're just as much passing around wrong information. I guess my problem is it's the nuance, it's the subtlety. Yeah, tax is theft, but it's not that, it's more. And then not knowing what it's more, and then disregarding how you would avoid that and point out how someone would be a criminal in that. Not talking to that is what the problem is. Focusing on a meme thought like tax is theft. It's worse, folks. Why are you just saying tax is theft? Why aren't you explaining how to start to avoid it? Why not get you want a common cause liberal side, become a movement? Why don't you get people into how to fight that? Why don't you understand it close enough to start making the right discussions on how to work that out? Or do we forever want to just say tax is theft and be taxpayers? And I mean that as the joined word. See, there's two words, taxpayers and taxpayers. Did you even know that? And so the nuance, everyone says, oh, that's just legalism. I don't want to know much more. I know about it. I don't want to deal with it. That's how they're taking you all down on every aspect of your life. And it's so simple to identify it and then call it out. I don't know why that's not the better answer. I really don't know why. But there's a neocon-backed fact checker. They're going to team up with Microsoft. So when you think like Microsoft is liberal and this and that, I told you it's the corporate data, big data, that's going to be worse than all of this. And so there's going to be a view here. They focus on the conservative. Then the conservative already has a movement inside that they're actually going to be working to bring what they call NewsGuard into plugins. There's already a plugin that exists, and they're going to bring it into, Microsoft is in discussion to bring it into their browsers and also into the Win 10. So you're going to have a filter inside your system that filters out what they consider, what these so-called fact checkers and so-called neocon agenda say is what you need what you need blocked and what will be allowed to you. And so they're going to have this plugin apparently is tied into some database. Again, you're trace and tracked and all this other stuff goes on behind the scene of all that. This neocon-backed fact checker, I can't believe it's the only one flying. I think there's maybe a couple of them, but it's going to become integrated in your system. My whole, I think last night I put something in the chat. People took it, they grabbed it and took it the wrong direction. It's the fact that these tools that we're given are going to be limiting our ability to see in the scope of things accurately, and we're going to have to start broadening our awareness of these things and to go find alternatives to the alternatives. We have to keep fluid on this condition. They're making it so you can't disable. You can disable. They call it disable, but not uninstall. And then so the big old discussion about how the people are going to do that, but it doesn't matter. They're going to. It's already integrated systemically. You can disable but not uninstall. And then okay, well we can then get rid of it. Well, you can't uninstall it. Some phones will let you install it, and then the company reinstalls it right after you uninstall it. So you go sit there and play with your phone while you're trying to uninstall Facebook. Big data integrating. Neocons coming together with Microsoft? Are you kidding me? The guy, Bill Gates, the guy that wants to kill you off because you breathe too much carbon, you're part of the equation for the carbon debt load that's a fraud? These are the same people that did the study that elder conservatives are passing fake news and they're not telling you about the tyranny and crime against you? This is our problem. We're not having enough people that readily, simply, and summarily identify these things and move to the point of how do we respond and how people need to respond. In this case, you're going to just stop. It won't happen, but you just stop buying their product and you tell them so. I don't think that ends it. But the point is that you have to become, I told you before, what I've done, austerity. You just put yourself in the future already, because if you don't, you're going to be part of that system, and they're going to have enough information when it comes on to you in order to make you a criminal. If we've heard enough of those stories, you can say, oh, what do I do? I'm not a criminal. I don't do crime. Well, they're going to make you doing crime. And they're getting the authority to come right in to haul you off, and then the presumption gets flipped on you. You have the burden. Instead of where it is now, it's on them, whoever them is. Soon after the social media purge of independent media sites and pages this past October, a top neocon conservative and insider, Jamie Fly, was caught stating that the mass deletion of anti-establishment and anti-war pages on Facebook and Twitter was just the beginning of a concerted effort by the United States government and powerful corporations to silence online dissent with the United States and beyond. Remember, I told you the news, the notice to us was Microsoft was going to give all of its technology to the United States government. And the only thing they're doing right now is big data collection surveillance. They're certainly not offering a product that's free of all that and free of unattachment. While a few relatively uneventful months of an online news sphere have come and gone since Fly made this ominous warning, it appears the neoconservatives and other standard bearers of the military-industrial complex and the U.S. oligarchy are now poised to let loose their latest digital offensive against independent media outlets that seek to expose wrongdoing in both the private and public sector. Now, this technology is called NewsGuard Technologies. I won't go on. You can read it if you're interested. I had a thought we might be able to combat some of this on these internet websites by, if I realize I've seen there's some scripts that can run to identify what plugins are being used. If people start using this NewsGuard, or it comes into the OS as a filter, I have a suspicion that there might be a script that can be put on a website to actually counter the message of NewsGuard saying that you don't have the right to this information, by saying that to the messenger or the viewer, the user, that then the website sees that NewsGuard's being run on their computer, they come back and tell the user that their system has been hacked, and go through a dialogue about what that might be in order to use it to inform, use their tool to inform the users that that's what's going on. Otherwise, I also had an idea that on all these websites that are so-called alt media, the ones that may be attacked, you put your own shields. Instead of NewsGuard, you have NewsGuardian and a shield. And the NewsGuardian, you can click on it and you get explanation of how the news that's brought forward is a certain standard. And you could put a shield that says, instead of NewsGuard, you have MediaGuard. You adopt the same strategy, but start putting it now on the websites, was an idea that I was having. I haven't thought the idea through too far, but there is certain things that are coming down to control us, and we can counter some of that. Like I was telling you before, that the federal government, come out and said that you got to expose the corruption and terrorism. I told you that's what I put that on my page. I put that phrase right out of the law. That's what I do. I do what the law has said you're supposed to do. And why do I do that? Because anybody who tries to take that part down, and my intention certainly behind this is to educate you as to the politicization and the terrorism that you suffer and the occupation that you suffer it's contrary to law. I can say that anybody who wants to pull this content down is a subversive, is a terrorist, is who the law was made to do. Why do I do it? Why do I do that? It gives me an angle to have a word in my mouth, folks. Is it going to be effective? I don't know, but I have the word, and most people probably don't. You could too. I guess is all I'm saying. Give yourself a place to stand that's not touchable, whether or not the criminal wants to come and try and trespass you. That's a different issue. So getting over the NewsGuard technologies, understand this is in the works. They're going to put it in an OS, folks. So another thing you could say on a website that someone clicks on or shows you, this is maybe News Guardian Shield, we're protected, a new Media Guard Shield, we make that up, we make that an independent standard, and you explain that if they want to get rid of the hacking that's been done to their system, they need to get to like a Linux OS and browsers that are not hackable. And so we start putting out the information now while we're given the notice now, we have time to move into how we're going to counter this, even though we are in an inferior position relative to the control grid that's set up for this thing. I guess my thought here is explaining how we're not silent, we're fluid, we're dynamic, and we're responsive in ways that I would hope that is a kind of an intelligent way to approach this. You just create your own standards, and then anybody who comes in, you just vilify the standard that they're using, which is clearly agenda-driven, and so it's self-sealing for you and anybody who adopts something like that. Now, whether or not that's the only thing that can be done, I don't know. It's just that I guess I'm bringing to you things. Let's look ahead, see the future, see where it's going. If you expect to have something to say to people, you're going to have to be able to protect against these. They're almost a crime without a remedy. And until they jump far enough that they start defaming you, and then you're capable to do a defamation suit or something like that, or maybe tie a bunch of people into some kind of a RICO or action. I don't know what else there is to do, but we have to think ahead into the future. I say that because I do this strategy thinking and tactic development in most everything that we have to do. If you think this is a joke, or we don't have to do it, or we don't keep our mind on it, I'm thinking about it all the time. Welcome to my world. And why do I do that? It's not because it's some boogeyman. It's because things on the ground, when you get out to go do something, have become insane to the point that you can't go out on the ground without the threat of someone maybe driving up on you and jumping out and shooting you within 30 seconds. That's where we've let this republic go. We never kept it, folks. And there's techniques on how they took it from us. And there's techniques on how they use our own nature to exploit us. Until everyone starts to figure that out, Generation Z, if you understand what I'm saying, if you hear me now, if you understand that you don't like what you're seeing, I don't know what to say. God help you, because I don't know anybody that's flesh and blood that's going to be able to pull this off if you keep hiding your head. When you finally come to terms, get out of your growing up, which is great right now, when you finally come to terms with the reality and you've understood how to do this and you've understood it's a big scam against you, you're going to need a lot of help that's not going to be available by your fellow man. I can just tell you that. And I know there's going to be a bunch of numbers coming, because it's interesting. This so-called Generation Z apparently is, I don't know this, I don't have a clue about it. It's taking the internet by storm in social media circles. There's some numbers out there for you folks. So I'm encouraged a bit, but it's not going to be apparently for us to help. Well, I can do what I can do, and I hope I'm doing that for most everybody. So the lack of our response is the silence. I tell you on the website, on the Blogcaster, is the defeat, is our defeat. And I keep telling you that as a message. Why I played crickets, it's the idiomatic meaning of crickets. Yeah, we got crickets. I like crickets. I usually tell temperature by crickets. I'm into all that stuff. But there's a meaning behind some of this that we bring up, idioms, about how we get our own cultures respond to express certain concepts. And the cricket has been something that was the epitome of non-response, the silence. And the silence is killing us. And so we had a little bit of fun. I think I mentioned it last week, although I don't remember. Talk about it was a finding down in Cuba and regarding the crickets, and I think it was Rob Works in the chat. I think it was. I noticed he said something. Well, some people don't like the sound of crickets, and I have to agree. There's some crickets that are just annoying. In fact, the cicada is one of them style of that type of bug. It's the same. I think it's in the same family or something. Boy, those are real irritating. And that's that buzz you hear in the summertime. It's in the trees and it's surrounding. It's just a din that you can't get away from. Well, little did many people know that maybe this little cricket can make so much noise to be annoying. And so it's kind of like an antithesis of what I've been saying, that you actually can cause damage being crickets. But the thing is all the crickets have to be making the same tone and have to do it in a certain way. And a little bit of evidence had come out that if you're a certain type of cricket, you can at least cause people to believe they're crazy. Now, I don't think that's an answer, but it is a notice to us. And we got that story from the Cuban embassy story. It studied mysterious sound recorded by sickened Cuban embassy. This is American embassy people in Cuba. Staff was just crickets, they said. So we've had a little bit of fun over the last week about this story, and I think Grimner put it up as well, and was referring to the fact that, I've been talking about these crickets for years and years now, and not to lose the point of the importance of them, and not to disrespect the cricket itself, but there's a thing about crickets. And here it comes in the news to let you know, not only are the silence is going to be the war against you, but they can create a sound to make you crazy. And look at the world, folks. As we don't respond to what's happening, look at how the world has gone insane. And the crickets, the society of crickets that we have. But since 2017, the baffling case of United States diplomatic staff in Cuba and elsewhere who developed symptoms resembling brain trauma after allegedly hearing strange noises, sometimes called Havana syndrome, have spawned plenty of theories of varying plausibility. A covert sonic device, malfunctioning spy gear, weaponized microwave radiation, poisoning, and even psychogenic illness. In the latest twist, the New York Times reported, these are the experts say as well, these are the news getters, the liberal side, that don't produce any facts, that are wrong. That's all good news, not fake. The New York Times reported on Friday a pair of researchers is pretty sure, I understand the pretty sure, but pretty sure that one of the recordings of the strange noises captured nothing more nefarious than a particularly loud breed of cricket. And so all the news is saying this is all this other sonic device, malfunction, weaponized microwave causing brain trauma. The report come back that when someone finally looked at it, didn't talk out of their sensationalism, but actually went to go investigate. When you finally took a scientist to look down, like anybody could have, you found out that the signature of the sound looks really close to a cricket. So that was where we got off on this fun thing that I do here behind the woodshed. But that wasn't good enough. I wanted to look at it a little bit better. And and I appreciate Gary L. produced. He went down through the article before I had gotten there, and he sent me off and sent, here's the sound of the cricket that is supposedly a microwave device that's causing brain trauma. And he got the sound file for it. And I found that this was really cool. I thank him for doing that. So let's listen to that sound. And this is totally different than the crickets. There's all kinds of cricket sounds. In fact, it took me a while to find one I could use for the broadcast. But here's the one that's attacking the U.S. Embassy, the deafening sound of silence at the U.S. Embassy. Now here's a little bit of a sound of what these it's a scientific file from a university for what's something called an Indie short-tailed cricket. Is that enough? You done? You got brain trauma now, folks? So that's the sound, and if you listen to the archives of the news things, it's very, very close to the sound that they have in the file. So here's the cricket sound that became news. It's not the Russians done it, not Putin done it, not the Cubans were doing. No, this could be an insect that does this, and this is kind of like the dichotomy between what nature can do versus what sensationalism of man's stories and the gullibility of people is. That it took someone to actually look at it. They got this. I took this file, I put it in Audacity. I ran a frequency spectrum, and the recording from the news story from their iPhone to this file is very close, but not identical. And so there's an interesting correlation, a very high probability correlation. And when you look at this by frequency, the sound of the natural cricket is shifted. I think it was 400 hertz, different than the sound recorded by the iPhone. And the natural cricket has a slightly different profile. They have more lower frequencies that come higher than the signature that they record. So that got me to thinking, well, what are we with these? What is the range of sound of a cricket? We got the one I play. We have this one now that sounds like, I mean, it's penetrating. If you hear it and you turn it up, I'd let it play a little bit. You can hear the oscillations in it. You can hear all kinds of interesting dynamics. To me, I thought it actually sounded like a cicada, but it's actually a cricket. And the difference could be simply the difference in where the Florida cricket, Indy cricket is versus where Cuba is. And I already know that there's crickets that respond to temperature. They'll start rubbing their little feet depending on what temperature it is. So it's not inconceivable that we have a species that has a 400 hertz shift and has a slightly different profile. It's not exact, but it sure is very, very close. Their peak is very, very close at the driving frequency. But that got me to thinking, what else? Here we have some big old deal that they said this was a sonic weapon causing brain trauma. So nature now can cause brain trauma for you. For all y'all that are freaked out and paranoid, watch out those crickets. I'm telling you, now they're really dangerous. They can cause brain trauma. The United States government certified. But what else? Science has looked at some of this, and artists have looked at this as, what else how else do we perceive these things, and what deceptions could be brought, and what don't we see with crickets, and how to develop all this, and scientifically what's going on. When we start really looking at it, I got a little bit intrigued, and I remembered something I was going to prepare for you before, that crickets, we can be lulled by crickets. It could be a heavenly sound. And here's what somebody did years ago that created what they said was a reduction in frequency. If we reduce the frequency of what we just heard, and you hear the sonic changes in it, the resonances that are adding and subtracting, what does this sound like when you reduce the sound? Well, here's what he came up with. It's pretty neat. It's called God's Cricket Chorus. And how hard, I mean, how bad a sound could that be? You could get into the sound. It's like there was the original of that. It's over an hour long. It ends up being that he just doesn't take and reduce the frequency. He actually adds a little bit of layering, but it was crickets, and it was slowed down. It just happened to be that he had to adjust the sound so that he had a couple playing the same sound, a couple crickets playing at a slightly different time to fill in the sound. So crickets, if we had the capacity, if we had the senses in us, we could actually hear a whole bunch of crickets. If we could actually adjust our hearing, we could actually hear God's chorus, God's cricket chorus, which certainly would lull us into believing the crickets were a good thing, right? But I wasn't settled on that. I wanted to learn a little bit more, and I went and no expense here was retained or was lost in getting the next answer. I want to know, well, if you keep going down, if that's what the sound of a cricket is, is a God's chord. What does it go when we just, where does the original sound, where does it start? What does a cricket sound like? And I commissioned the Acme engineers and audio and file people at the Acme manufacturing plant to figure out what this sound was. What does it all start from? What do cricket sounds actually originate? And they came up with this scientific file for me after they reduced the Acme. That's where we get the Acme, behind the woodshed Acme bucket of sand that everyone puts their head in, and the Acme behind the woodshed umbrella. I was wondering whether or not we could use this sound to help us counter-resonate. But this is where I found they said this is the origination of what a cricket sound really is, and this is what the file they sent me. So that's what you slow this file down. You can go ahead and play games with what a cricket does, how dangerous they are in the embassy. But you slow this file down, and it's what you just heard. Crickets are a representation of humanity, just expelling. Another plague hits us after the week I told you about watching out. Be careful, this year starts with Djinn. It looks like we got the tricksters coming out. Fascinating what happens after I say some of this stuff sometimes. And I can tell you, I can't get to it all. There's so much observations that can be made. It's running me down. But right after I tell you that the jinn is in the world, this happens in Mecca. 10 plagues of Mecca. Horrid locust swarms invade Islam's holiest city. And the interesting problem was, actually, this was a herd of black crickets that swarmed into Mecca. So this is our world, folks. It's just it's a fractal of us and us expelling in all the wrong ways. And here we have a week after I say there's funky things in the world coming. Watch out. It never happens, but Mecca got swarmed with a bunch of black crickets to the point that they started fumigating the place. The whole God's house was fumigated, killing all these crickets to let you know what the end result of being a cricket is. An operation has been launched to eradicate the insects. Whether the calamity was a divine message or the result of migration remains a mystery, but the massive swarms of locusts might still be an unsettled one. That's the opening paragraph. It's actually a black cricket, they find out. And the question of whether it was divine or a migration, they answer by the black cricket does not migrate. And so this is an totally unknown thing, why it happened. In fact, at the very end, they say, no comment was available yet for the reason for this plague. Mecca swarms with black crickets, folks. If you don't think there's something afoot this year, I'm going to be interested to watch how we roll this out. Pretty interesting stuff. This is like the one-off novel stuff. It just doesn't happen. So we can all conjecture as to why, or we can just observe it and go find the important things we need to be doing and just not be that cricket. Just not be the sound that sounds if you speed it up. Because we get to do all this technology to distract us, to keep us off point, give us the fake news, if you will, the fake sound. We can speed all that up, and we can become a weapon that causes mind trauma to ourselves, or we can just be what we are, as a bad exhalation. What about all that fumigating and polluting of the environment? We talk about moving ecology into this so-called climate science. It's nonsense. They've changed the fact that we shouldn't be defecating in our own bed to having it a cause of our just existence is a violation. In a story that came through that was talking really about 5G, and I found some really glaring incongruities, glaring errors, actually. something so bad I couldn't use the article for the broadcast. So I thought it would be neat to tell you all about it, but I couldn't. It was just too much information that was not quite right. That said, there's always looking inside of things. You still find some information that I guess is usable if you, again, care and want to apply it. And I talk to you, those of you that are interested in clearing the atmosphere of a lot of the problems that we see, whether you now identify the chemtrails, you identify it as a weapon against you, as I told you in Title 50, whether or not we now see that the academia started to run cover for an existing program that was spraying particulates, aerosols in the atmosphere. Through the 5G discussion article, that it was just a big mashup of a bunch of information. That I read and I got down to the point where it talked about ion thruster engines used for launch, and I said I don't know, unless you can tell me, folks. I don't know of any ion thruster engine that could launch a spacecraft from Earth. They can be used in space, but they don't have the power to launch a spacecraft. And so I got to that point. I said, no. I've been too loose on reading. Let me look at a couple things. Well, I wanted to go back and I wanted to research some things anyway, because some of that stuff's interesting in any regard. Always with an eye out. Oh, I got my eye out. I poke my eye out looking for this stuff sometimes, but sometimes it shows up in unexpected places. That went to read about this, the changing of the adjustment of this space junk that's up there because of these 5G satellites that are going up, which I thought was just a matter of course. I don't know that was a question. I suspected all these thousands and thousands and thousands of satellites they're putting up is for this web, so I didn't think that was a question to be anything to be questioning. I thought that was the inevitability. But this led me on to looking at that, space flight pollution. How do rocket launches and space junk affect Earth's atmosphere? Which is something I hadn't looked into too much, and I wanted to know, well, how much study has there been? And again, for those of you that are responding and doing comments or whatever, or having a thing to say locally or your local things, this is information here that was pretty interesting. And when I read the first paragraph, I realized how easy it is to counter all the scientists who want to have an opinion whatsoever about anything about our atmosphere, essentially. In this phrase here, nobody knows the extent to which rocket launches and re-entering space debris affect Earth's atmosphere, but such ignorance could be remedied soon. So here we have these atmospheric models that have no knowledge about what a rocket motor does. Whatever design, whether you want to use the kerosene style, hydrogen, oxygen, kerosene creates soot. Soot's another problem. What does soot do? The scientists don't even have a clue, folks, and yet they'll make climate models, and liberal or any media will tell you that sell you on climate change. And yet they won't claim that a liberal who sends that out and promotes that is fake news. It's actually a crime against you. But nobody knows the extent of just rocket launches, folks, on this. But the ignorance could be remedied soon. Interesting article. What captured my mind about this was that, again, they don't have a knowledge. They're going to look for it. That's fine. I don't have a problem with them looking at it. But it came down to a discussion about what it is in the atmosphere that these rocket motors produce. And under the heading of no yardstick, which means they don't even have a standard to put these models against. They just make this stuff up. It's man-made, folks. I tell you, it's man-made anthropomorphic global warming. Man is Michael Mann. He's got 2 N's in his name. If you haven't heard that before, I'm going to repeat it. Say it to you for the first time, but most of you have heard me say it. Michael Mann made global warming. Made it up. And so here's the key study focus is the climate impact of major rocket engine emissions. And here's the list of what the rocket engine will put out. Carbon dioxide, water, black carbon, and alumina particles discharged from solid rocket booster motors. Remember me years and years ago talking about aluminum oxide, folks? The aluminum that the engineers were putting together to do certain things. It was the humic acid study I found. I asked, why are you looking at humic acid relative to aluminum oxides? And they found out within 3 days the evidence disappeared. Do you remember that? Some of you have been around for years. A recent finding, Ross said, is that alumina particles previously thought to cool the Earth by scattering solar flux back to space actually warm the planet by absorbing outgoing terrestrial long-wave radiation. However, fully appreciating the microphysics of alumina and other rocket emissions introduced into the atmosphere requires more research. First point, they don't know. Secondly, the aluminum containing molecules that they throw up in aerosol, they don't have a clue it's 180 degrees what they thought it did. Just like carbon was a temperature mitigator, alumina actually warms the environment. Do you think that this engineering, spraying what they've tested to be alumina particles and others, alumina particles, may not be helping cause any so-called man-made global warming? And as a matter of fact, I told you, when they tell you what's going on, it's what they're doing, man-made the global warming. That maybe these chemtrails with alumina now on this little piece of information, looking at something totally else about finding out they don't even know about rocket launches and how many are they doing now. And I talked to you about all about this stuff. And I told you about the chemical mixing that goes on and the temperatures that are going on, and they bust through the atmosphere, and it sucks a little bit of the atmosphere out quicker than it's supposed to. It disturbs the upper atmosphere. It may be partly responsible for the accelerated, at times, acceleration of the depletion of the ozone hole, and it wasn't the patent-driven profits for your refrigerants. We've talked about all this before. If you don't, I mean, we talked about all this other thing, but I talk about that stuff too. But here, alumina particles are known to warm the environment, folks. Can't you just take this little paragraph here, maybe even do some more information to find out the source of that? In fact, there is a little link here, and you would tell people who want to discuss this at a regulatory level, you don't know what the heck you're talking about until you go and investigate this part. And why aren't you investigating that part? How are your models of any value? Notwithstanding the complexity of the model, think about the dynamic of the environment, our atmosphere. Fascinating, just beautifully fascinating. And they don't know anything about rocket launches. They don't know anything about aluminum particles, but they do know that alumina has the effect of warming the atmosphere. On the other hand, carbon, which they're trying to kill, is they want to stop you from producing carbon. They want to, which is a mitigator, and it actually cools the environment in mitigation. They want to stop that. Do you think man-made, you can look at those two ideas, that man-made is exactly what they're telling us? Man is making global warming, whatever they can do. I don't know that it's that much. I think it's just, it ends up being to know nothing because the world system is so large. The point is they get a lot of traction from it. And they get people to buy into it. And they get to have news that says that, oh, the conservative elderly pass fake news, and you look right past the fact that the people writing the academics who write the study don't think that climate change, man-made global warming, man-made global warming is a fraud, treason, or a crime. And so we have the evidence in the notices of the news. We call it the news. It's notice that we could take. Any one of us can grab on a subject matter of our interest, and we can take out, they call it cherry picking. Yeah, I would cherry pick those two paragraphs. And then I'd do some backup research, and I'd put those together in a comment and say, before you move further, you're going to have to stop and look at this. And what am I talking about? For those of you that would take this up, you're hitting right at the heart of the implementation of sustainable development, which is the destruction of your life. Your life. Each one of you listening, it destroys your life. It eventually becomes this austerity and worse that they're seeing in France. I'm not talking about out there, folks. I'm talking to you, each one of you that are listening. You have the power to reach onto these anomalies in these stories. Everything that says, oh, we didn't know about that. We're scientists. We didn't know about that. We didn't know about that. That's the point. And the ones that are speaking that call themselves consensus scientists, they're criminals. They're political lobbyists if they weren't criminals. They're not actual scientists, and they will not agree with that one little bit. In other words, they listen, they have their own echo chamber and believe their own fake news and don't recognize it's actually worse than news. And so I just found this phenomenal in a way. That the subject matter of aluminum I talked about years and years and years ago. I explained how the scientists know how to adjust the aluminum molecule, make aluminum molecules to do whatever they needed in the atmosphere, whether it was adjust the style of light that's transmitted through these things, whether it's the amount of charge that will be stored in the atmosphere, whether there would be no charge, whether they would combine with other materials. That aluminum was one of the key elements, and we know that just from, if you know chemistry, a little bit of chemistry, you know that aluminum is a very reactive process, and it's really man-made. Aluminum itself is man-made. The natural occurrence, like bauxite, it's in combination. It's all stored up, locked up. We break it apart, and it's really reactive. In fact, I was looking, a long time ago, I was looking at making batteries for electric cars. No, not in the last 20 years like Tesla, no, before. Aluminum was one of the candidates because it's very lightweight, but it has a 3 or so valence electrons, and it has a bonding that's easy to break, easy to bind up. The fact that it can be bound up with things is easy. It's a tool. You can cause it to bind up and unbind and all this kind of neat stuff. Well, they've taken that technology, that what it can do, and they put it in your atmosphere. And now we learn today, if we didn't know before, those of you that read the article, I apologize for wasting your time. But we learn here, they don't know about what it does in the atmosphere, as far as how it affects it relative to the weather. They do know the chemistry behind it. And they've been using it, as I told you, years and years and years ago. All based on what? Looking at a test about humic acid's effect on aluminum particles. Wasn't even about climate change, wasn't about none of this stuff. It was just this interesting little study. Why would they look at that? And here it comes today, so many years later, to explain to us they don't even know what they're doing. They're just looking at how to get rid of the evidence, as I told you then before. That's conjecture that they even look at it that way. I'm telling you that I found out that they were finding out when the evidence of their spraying, or evidence of whatever they're doing in the world, or the evidence of whatever they're allowing in the world, they are looking at when the evidence disappears. And the other thing is that these tests that are showing this stuff where there's a natural humic acid content, you're testing those things have to be 3 days old, because after about 3 days, I think it was 3.2 days or something, the humic acid breaks down the aluminum into something else. So here we have it. The atmosphere, the crickets make their bass sound, bass frequency is a pretty foul atmosphere, and here we have rocket launches that create part aerosols, the condition of which generally they don't know, and the alumina effect that's in the rocket motors, they have no clue, but that they've done a test and found out that it warms the atmosphere. Isn't that man-made warming? I would have to say you're on a path that way that's plausible. And if they're not looking at that, then maybe they're not. I'm talking about the alumina, not the rocket launches, because they're going to shut down all that if you start pushing it too hard. What you're trying to show is the fraud, that nature's bigger than anything man can actually do, and the contribution of man has not been shown actually to do a thing. And it can't be shown that every night. As soon as you get cooled off, your atmosphere goes down to wherever it goes down to. And those of us in the winter side of the world, we know it gets pretty cold at night. All that heat's lost. It never adds. It all gets lost. Well, unless you got to just spray it over with a bunch of aluminum particles, and maybe your heat will last another few hours. So what about this polluted environment that we don't understand and don't know and continue to do as scientists? We want to pretend we're scientists, and we want to purvey and promote all this stuff, global warming, climate change. We don't know the thing about it, that what we provide for you as a government, remember the government sits back here in every one of these things, that what we provide for government is allowed and allowable and understood, and that what we're getting from the information is the truth of what we even see. I came up with something here based in space and flight, based on The Far Side, which used to be a comic strip or a comic book, which is kind of funny. I like to think of it in that regard, that China going to the far side by its rocket launch, getting over to the far side, not the dark side, because it has a light side, because it's on the side of the sun. When in our new moon, it's on the side of the sun where they are. But interesting video pops up, not of a launch and not of an atmosphere of the United States of Earth, but a video of a lander, supposedly. We only see what appears to be a foot. Remember, take everything with a grain of salt here. But it's fascinating nonetheless, that our eyes may deceive us as well. And right now, it's not really a pride, but it was a capacity I have. Being a photographer, being in videography, I have very good eyes for that, very good eyes to identify what I'm looking at, very good discernment on what I'm seeing, good reflexes on how to resolve certain problems if you're in the moment of the photography. I would say top of the class on what I produced, and kind of know what I'm looking at. I think I found my limit today, and it may be because I'm way getting too elder anymore. But you watch this video going down. We have a cause and effect of the atmosphere. The lack of atmosphere on the moon is pretty interesting and deceptive as well. Whether or not I'm actually looking at something from China landing on the moon, I don't know, but I'll go with it because I think it's fun to think about. I hope they did, just 'cause. But if you watch this video and you want to test your perception, maybe you can communicate with me on how you did it. But I realize as I'm watching this thing come in that I could not see the transition between the camera going at a very high altitude where everything is little lumps and divots and smooth terrain, where you see the arc of the moon as it moves, as this lander comes in, and then it bobbles. It's kind of an interesting little bobble that it's coming in and kind of coming in not so smooth, just subtle. I could not, and I still have not been able to identify the transition between when that lander was way up high and everything looked like divots and little potholes, to when it was only a few feet above the thing and it looks identical. Little divots and little potholes, and it's only 10, 15 feet above it, and you only know that by the time it's taking for the thrust to start hitting. And then the interesting thing I noticed that when the thrust hits the moon, supposedly, it blows away all the dust, and you see what appears to be solid rock. And actually, I think I see veining in the rock, which is kind of interesting as well. And all the fractal that it looks like from the not being able to identify when it's in orbit, coming in, or into its descent, and to landing. It doesn't look different. The ground does not look different until the dust gets blown away. And then you see rocks. But you also know it's landed supposedly on the moon, which I found fascinating. Our eyes, for me, this time, I cannot relate when the vehicle was above the moon, coming in, and right before it landed. I could not tell the difference. The moon looks like a fractal of itself when the dust is on it. Maybe I'll let you think about all that. Maybe you can work it out help me work it out, because I could not. I looked at that thing over and over, and I could never pick out when the moon looked like you were close from when it was far. And then I noticed a maneuver that was made. I call it the where are we actually going to land this maneuver, because this thing comes in, and then it stops, and it reshuffles itself. Well, it's not going in. It's actually sustaining itself up in the sky, and you get to look at this thing that still looks like it's really high up in the sky, and yet it stops, and it maneuvers itself to a spot, and it's like someone just said, where are we actually going to land this thing? They make that decision, and then it goes in, which is kind of fun to watch. But I'd like to have someone maybe look at this when you get the link. Maybe explain where it is you see where it changes from I'm far away from the moon surface to I'm right above it. Where does the distinction happen in that? When do the little mounds and divots look different? And to me, that it was just an interesting, maybe whatever the failure in my eye was to discern the distinction, just struck me as interesting as we see the computer-generated fractals, the animations that you keep going in and in and in and in. It's the same scene over and over and over. You never see the distinction. I think this video, given it's a lunar lander, and that's the video that we're seeing, I think we have a natural evidence of the fractal of nature. And I'd like maybe hear some conversation. Maybe it's short. You don't have to get over and through it. We don't have to get too deep, but maybe you take a look and tell me, when do you see it go from I'm way high up in the sky to I'm only 20 feet above this planet? So, getting into this, a little bit of deception here, how we get told things, how we're trying to observe things, trying to learn to discern as we see, trying to make, we have all the ideas about maybe we didn't go and all this other stuff. And what China did was kind of amazing. They went on the far side, which means you couldn't communicate with that lander. So they had to have 2 satellites. They had quite a complicated maneuvering there. And then there's a theory about why, and H3 was one. Well, I'm wondering how much of that's a diversion too, because I'm going to tell you, I know that there's H3 here on the Earth, even though they don't talk about it. And so there's these little facts that we each have with us that we kind of know. Well, not kind of know. We know there's certain facts that are not quite right, that come underneath the skin of the truth. And so it kind of throws a little bit of question on everything we see if we're looking. What I was interested with that video was that my eyes were not able to see the distinction between I'm up high down to I'm low, and then it just starts to question all the things that we perceive. Everything we have, everything we take in, even if it was the truth, are we perceiving that it is the truth? But how easy it would be for us to accept the truth. Let's give it to them that 65 and older than 65 will just give out fake news. If that's the case, how easy it is that we will lull ourselves into that and accept certain things that I kind of point out to you here all the time. You can disregard a lot of this, but some of this gets real dangerous. And to the point now, if you disregard some of the things I'm saying and how to deal with it, or to deal with it ahead of time, it may mean your life. It may mean what happens to you. Someone who doesn't look like he was on death's doorstep just got that message, and now he don't know that, I suppose. Maybe he does. But he's not around. He takes information. He accepts what he's told. He's someone in the medical profession, no less. And because, cancer pioneer Martin Gore's sudden death from a routine jab. I don't want to dwell too much on this. He got a vaccination. The guy's pictures, he looks like he's vibrant, healthy, a researcher, an older guy. Not old. I mean, maybe 60, 70. Okay, maybe old. Anyway, he goes in, gets a jab, a vaccination, and he's dead. And so this is just that quick, folks. I want to remind you that the standard for that thing, deciding on whether you need to get a vaccine, is whether or not the risk to you of getting the disease is greater, and the harm that will cause is greater than what the product sheet will tell you can happen to you. And then you also understand, as I've told you, the medical people, like the scientists, don't know what Illumina does in the environment, or what the rocket launches do. They don't know. If they do, they're lying and not telling you. But if they don't know, as far as the doctor is concerned, they don't know what this stuff does to you. So you take in this information, and you're going to perceive what you will, like you will if you listen to me. And then it matters on what you do with that information. And this is one of the tales, is that you can disregard some things. You can allow yourself to be lulled into being told what's up, and that could be a lie for you. And I'm asking you, don't let that happen to you. And maybe this guy, Martin Gore, interesting the word Gore and climate change and all this other stuff, but Al Gore, I guess, is maybe a distant brother. They're starting to be exempling their own medicine. See, they agree. They don't tell you all that they don't know, and they don't really tell you what they do know. But one specialty doesn't communicate with the other, and this guy's dead for whatever reason. But the cause, the proximity of the effect of the vaccine seems to indicate that was the cause. And yet we hear what came out also another, let's say, for those of you thinking about the flu shot, again, I've told you, depending on your risk, depending on what the effect of the actual thing you get, is how you analyze this. So I can't say don't get a jab, don't get the vaccination, but for the most part, most of these things are deadly. And I've told you, part of the issue is if you're going to die from what you have, you might want to get that vaccine. But you better start checking whether or not your genetics is going to be able to handle that. As Dr. Andrew Zimmerman now comes out, as I have a link to a full affidavit on an alleged link between vaccines and autism that the United States government covered up. Again, I won't go so deep in all this. It's an affidavit. You could read it. You can look at what the doctor says. This is an insider, a whistleblower, if you will, who tried to tell the government. The government wouldn't have it. And so there's been now an investigation movie called Full Measure. The links are here. You can go watch it, and you can get more information. You know, whatever they want to do, you have to find out whether or not you're that class of genetics that's susceptible to the things they're not telling you, that slowly over time finally comes out in a system that's actually tailored to allow it. And what I tell you to do attempts, or does for a large part of it, but if not, attempts at least get you on the path to cut into that obstruction to you and others, essentially. It ends up being for others as well, which I tend to feel is an easy way to continue. Like, in other words, when you feel down, you say, well, I'm working for other people too, not just me. Because if it's just up to me, I'll just tolerate. There's nothing more I can do, so I'll just tolerate it. But when you displace yourself and find out that you can help other people as well what you do, I can find that it helps me to move along in the times that I look around and I see we're not going to do this. Like I said today, we're not going to do this. You can change my mind. Go ahead. I want you to change my mind, but we're not going to do this. We're going to make all the excuses and not. So I'm speaking to the future, I hope, given my archive lasts long enough somewhere. And I just hope there's enough information and tidbits that I throw out, how to look at these criminals, how to look at what's going on, how they got us to at that time, how they got you into the hole, how they got you in the stinking abyss, how it's foggy and stenchy, and you can't get yourself out of it, and yet there's going to be a way to claw your way out, and it's going to be that you do claw yourself out of it. But in the meantime, you're going to be faced, as we move into the future, all that I was asking you to do your comments in the GMO labeling. Started out to be a label, an action to label food for a GMO, and that thing got hijacked. Part of it is because lots of people didn't do what I was asking to go. If you find interest in knowing what's in your food and want to be part of this thing, to at least be a voice to begin to stop it, that you need to make the comments to be giving yourself the standing to be the one that can stop it. We now have the news that the USD did publish labeling rules. And goodbye GMO, they say, goodbye GMO, hello bioengineered. So the message to me is you just have to keep attaching GMO to the word bioengineer. And then this is now, when you see this, I told you the problem of this legislation was the exemptions they give. Like you look at Title 50, that you can't do it, but if the government finds it needs to, it can harm you. It's the exceptions. And within the exceptions of this new rule is enough to drive, all the GMOs through, GMO-derived byproducts through, that I don't know that I'd want in my food. But this is what, again, legalizing does. You got to really understand this. Legalizing is the criminalization with an exception. As long as you stay within the exception, you can commit the crime. And so when you've got a legalized thing, you're committing a crime, but for the sanction and largesse of the government. I don't know if anybody looks at it that way either. For those of you that want to be not in the government and you think you're participating, let's say, in cannabis, when they legalize it, you're taking the largesse by the government will to not beat on you as long as you stay within the confines of what they've said. It's another invisible style prison. That's why I say you deschedule it and non-criminalize it, period. But anyway, so here we have the news. For those of you that were looking or thinking about it or keeping track, that little label, they didn't use the smiley face label. They didn't use the black and white one either. But they used the little sun with a plant over the depiction of the rows of a field, counter green. And now it's called bioengineered, derived from bioengineering. So expect to see that. But there's enough stuff that's now GMO and bioengineered that they use in production that they can to drive a truck through in your food at this point. So it started out as a decent cause called Just Label It, but that got hijacked. And this is what I tell you about how when you're doing this stuff, look at the terrain, look at what happens. The legalization of pot, I told you a long time ago, I identified it as a setup. And you're watching it. You're watching how it doesn't work. You're watching how the government tried to take it. You're watching everything the government touches turns to even green gold cannot be made gold now. It's because it was never about that. And if you want the stuff to stop, you're going to have to step up and be better than the blazing saddles cowboys, I suppose. The government shutdown exposes another reason to abolish the TSA. Now, this is an interesting article. I want you to read it. He goes through quite a bit. What I wanted to point out, though, based on what I'm hearing about this so-called government shutdown, what we're told and how we don't respond to it. And what I said we have to respond to, the TSA violation that it is, and all the reasons. And otherwise, Jonathan Corbett, I think, was on this. I don't know. I've not talked with him. I don't know anything. I haven't went back to his website. I just thought about the name. He's wanted to go against this in a proper way. I've explained how he ought to really move this thing. I've explained that you need to challenge the whole premise. This government shutdown exposes, and this is why I want to talk about this report here. It's not about the TSA and how nasty it is and what it's doing and how it's all interfered with your freedom, so-called freedom to travel. The point is that the complaint is that the TSA workers are not getting paid, and so they're not working, even though they've been told to. It's like a deferral of payment, but they're not working anyway, and it's causing backups in the lines at the airports or wherever. I don't know if they're doing this at the train stations either at this point, but at the airports for sure. At the partial shutdown and the non-payment exposes another thing, and it turns right on what I told you need to attack. The purpose under which they use the need of the DHS and the TSA was this fraud that they piggybacked upon on 9/11. It's the fraud of the national security need. And together with other articles we've talked about, when you understand that they've done 95% of the time they've been able to sneak things on, you can prove that the TSA is worthless. And it was just a thing in order for the government to gain surveillance control. And you see how that's rolling out. You can do all that. I thought that this was a proof for y'all that are interested, any one of you, anybody please, folks, to identify that the TSA is as they say right now. It's non-essential, to prove it's not an imperative. You can prove by the fact that the government's not funding it to show that it's a lie that it's an imperative for national security. Next. Anybody can take this stuff up, folks, and you can amplify what I'm saying. Border Patrol and TSA allowed to secretly spy on everyone's social media accounts. Now, who wouldn't be interested in doing that? That I'm just telling you the answer beforehand. The government itself now proclaims in its lack of making it an essential condition that it's non-essential. And where the Supreme Court has said that they only get to do what is practicable without violating you too much and reasonable, a non-essential imposition is an unreasonable imposition, isn't it? But if you don't attack it, Border Patrol and TSA are allowed to secretly spy on everyone's social media accounts. The United States Border Patrol, CPB, and the TSA claim they need to secretly spy on everyone's social media accounts so they can understand a person's relationship on their friends, family, and the government. What business is it of theirs? But anyway, we can go through all the discussion. You can say F them. You can do all kinds of stuff. This is what's coming down. This is how they're coming down and giving themselves license. If they give themselves license in any spot, it'll trickle out and metastasize all over the country, if this isn't already across the country. Why? Because we got crickets. We don't respond in a better fashion. We turn away from suggestions to respond better. We don't respond at all. Or when we respond wrongly. And that's getting us down the road to all of this thing where the surveillance society comes on you. While everybody should have the smarts, should have the intelligence, should have the experience, should have the time as they retire to be able to fight against it. Like, I don't even know why I would read more. Read more of the story. Read this thing. Read what's going on. Read how they're locking the cage up on you. Read how they're bringing it right to your doorstep. You don't think it's happening. This is coming right to your doorstep. It's right now at your computer keyboard and your social media, which is in your house. They mention in this rule about entities, that's the government, folks. I don't know what, I'm sitting here, what else do you need to hear that everyone I see would rather argue amongst each other than to start to focus on the unique conditions that the government explains to us it isn't right, and not use that against them, at least make an issue of it for others to see, because apparently not many see, actually. They get to gather up all this information from social media accounts. Why? What, so they can make up stuff? What do I tell you, folks? They make up stuff. What do we find about Boston? Boston PD was making up stuff. If you were in the same proximity of your social media account and you got your geolocation or whatever they can find out from you, and you happen to associate or respond to someone who they found was on a gang list, or you walk by them on the street and their geolocation found you, you'd be deemed to be associated with a gang member. This is what the threat is to you. When they put you on all these programs and social credit, remember, don't forget those things. Those are so sitting all driving all this. Cars will soon be monitoring their drivers and selling the data they collect, if they aren't already. In case you were wondering, the evolution of the smart product hasn't skipped the automobile industry. So you might as well say smart is surveillance, folks. It's everywhere. I talk about this all the time. You know about it. Those of you who heard from me about this, you probably already know about it, but you kind of you don't think it's happening. You don't think it's important to you. I don't know why. This goes on to other things. It's the pebble that starts the ripple that turns into a tsunami at some shore. A new report at Reuters notes that at CES in Las Vegas this year, startup companies are going to be looking to demonstrate to automakers how their technology gathered data on drivers, all for enhanced safety purposes. Sure. Okay? Safety and security. And you're taking this up, you buy the product, well, that's the first thing you don't do. I don't know what you're all going to do in replacement. You can't buy this new stuff. You just got to stop buying. That's part of the problem. But these companies are doing this. It's all on course. It's what 5G is partly also going to be. And they take this information about you, and they can do whatever they want. They make money from what you do. They are parasites. And I don't know where the fact of you buying the product allows them to extend their product into your private life. This is a twist on the same problem. When they sold you this stuff, why did you not have a right to fix this stuff? Why did they retain actual possessions? When the software went to licenses, people didn't understand what that might mean. It means that they retain actual possession of these things, and they can control it. Partly why I think the Linux condition is so important. There's no possession there, and there's no claim to possession. But this information, it comes out like it's some news to you that they're going to be now taking your data, and you say, okay, I don't have a new car, I don't got to worry about it. Well, fine, they've had OnStar, it's been doing the same thing all these years. When you finally get a car, your car breaks, it's made to break, and you get a new, or you're going to have to get a new one eventually, it's going to be there, it's going to be tracking you. And then I see the word drive, it's the data on all drivers. None of you step up in mass to argue the fact that they breached the grant of your right to use the highway not to drive. And they mischaracterized you as drivers to be able to put this commerce regulation on you. Generation Z, are you listening? Because the guys and gals I'm talking to now don't seem to hear it. They use the word drive. This is on drivers. This is commerce regulated federally. The smart stuff is federal. It's all implementing sustainable development. It's why 5G's coming in. Keep quiet, folks, and then complain about all the problems later. Java Doctor, good. You got outsmarted. That's right. You all got outsmarted. There was no need for it. Thank you, God, Java. No need for it, and you all did. You all sat there. And then it's worse because I was telling you about it. At least start the argument and start. You don't have to not have these things that you don't have to be, oh, I got to cut myself loose. I've told you it's probably better that you have it right now, and then you charge them against the right as a felony. You're in a whole better position when you can do that. They can't use anything against you. None of you seem to want to do it that way. And yet the equity cases I've instituted attacking against that, on that premise, all go unanswered by the government. And so, they actually mentioned self-driving, full self-driving is still years ahead of the United States. That's what I'm telling you about this 5G and this data. They're going to get their data from you before it goes to self-driving, and that's what 5G is all about. It's all in these reports. And yet we heard it before, all you folks that want that state-of-the-art, smart, green technology that Tesla's making in their electric cars. And again, I'm a kid. When I was a kid, I wanted to design batteries because that was the biggest deficit in making electric cars when I was in high school. I thought that was the coolest thing. It's not even a new idea, folks. Electric cars existed before, I think before diesel. And the guy Diesel who invented it. Electric cars have been a long time. The problem was the density of the batteries. They've kind of resolved it a bit. They still have a long way to go. But they've got, when you got vehicles that fly on batteries, you're getting close. They still got a long way to go. I'm a big time, because I can't do it though. I'm a fan of the technology. Oh, fan, I guess, aircraft. I'm a fan of technology. But what they're doing with it is a deception. I don't not like electric cars or the power or what it can do. What I don't like is what I see they're doing with it, and you're all buying into that part. Tesla and other electric car makers send data to Chinese government without the owner's knowledge. So the prior story that Americans got wasn't even news relative to China. The companies have already integrated with the government because the governments are in control. They're the one with the power to hurt you. And corporation is care less about you. It's about what? Profit, right? And that's also why the stakeholder has such a throat hold on these corporations. Because the stakeholder, by definition, is just someone that can do you harm and let you know it. And that they're willing to do harm if you don't comply with their extortion or coercion. I read all the documents on all this. It's not even news. So it's not even news that the car companies are already communicating at least with one government. And I understand that OnStar and other services have been together. That has never been a question. So we can continue to tell ourselves stories. We can watch the rollout of everything they want to do in 5G and complain and not look at the source of the problem and get at the subsource, which is really the problem with 5G as I can see it right now with the federal agency, which needs to be attacked. And what is that? The subsource is the source of their science, which is faulty. You have to attack those two associations that are not looking at this bigger thing. And to help you on that, if you are interested, an interesting statement came out. It was called The Appeal. We, the undersigned of scientists and doctors, recommend a moratorium on the rollout of the 5th generation 5G for telecommunications until potential hazards for human health and environment have been fully investigated by scientists independent from industry. 5G will substantially increase exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic fields on top of the 2G, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, etc. for telecommunications already in place. RF EMF has been proven to be harmful for humans and environment. Notwithstanding the fact they treat you like animals here is an European Union scientific submission that anybody in the United States can pick up and then refer to it. I would say you go and you find out their proofs and you put it together and you submit it to the FCC, and then more importantly, you go after their sub-experts. You go to those two people and you say, how come your outcome, your output, your product to the advice to the FCC is not fraud, where you're not looking at what all the scientists in the European Union just submitted. So you can use what they're doing. It's all the same technology over here for those of you that are interested. Get yourself involved in a viable way, not just complaining about it. And what hasn't been spoken of that came out, and some of you with HARP might be excited about this, because of the way the array is set up there, and it's what's called a phased array problems. It's how they can direct energy, and it works bidirectionally as well. It'll all depend on the technology that you're installing. It comes out at the same time with the scientists and other people that are submitting something to the EU. Remember, we also had the cannabis thing that was talked about. The United States was to adopt or come to meet with the international standard that says the same thing going on here. It's not just the United States rollout, it is a global rollout. But they now are more scientists stepping up to inform people of this technology. And so I'm not even into the fact of what it does or doesn't do. Again, the technology is neat. I don't know what to say. Part of me is okay with it. But there's these implementations that you're not. In other words, you don't get in your microwave to use it if you use a microwave. Some of you will say it's no good. Well, you got to go look a lot closer. If you cook it a long time, yeah, it's not good. Nothing happens to water when you use a microwave to heat it up. Someone will say, well, we got spin factors that go on. Well, there's ways to counter that if that's what you're really worried about. So technology is a tool. And it depends on whether you overuse it or underuse it or don't compensate for certain things. It's how we use what we are created with. Well, I'm using to get to you right now, I'm being radiated to death if this is the case. I've got boils and cancers all over me because I'm sitting in a room that's got 5 gigahertz, not 5G, but 5 gigahertz send signal in order to get you high-speed internet to the router so you can hear me. I don't know if you've noticed, but for years and years I haven't had a problem because the generous donor gave me this system for high-speed invisible. It's an invisible system. Get you the signal. I need to sit right near it. It's the only place I can put the thing. And so there's just some trade-offs I'm going to have to make it if I'm going to get my message out. But, guess what? I don't have these things growing all over my body yet. So apparently I'm doing some other things to counter it. So without getting all lost here, we have the idea that people are looking at all this communication, this technology, and saying it really isn't fully tested. I'm saying that there's an administrative process you need to understand in order to interject yourself in a thing that looks like it's closed to you. And now we have this idea, more along the HARP idea and directional energy. And I'm not going to get lost in the HARP thing. There's a whole other story going on with that as well. But from blankets to bullets, Cellular Phone Task Force is a response that they looked at. The single most important fact about 5G that nobody is talking about is something called phased array. It will totally change the way cell towers and cell phones are constructed and will transform the blanket of radiation which has enveloped our world for 2 decades into a million powerful beams whizzing by us at all times. A mutual friend with whom this author was speaking during a campaign to defeat SB 649 in California passed the message from Blake, Levitt, quote, 5G antennas will be phased arrays. Arthur will know what that means, and the author does. His name was Arthur, the author. Phased arrays were one of the first things I learned about in the very beginning of my long involuntary journey from medical student to campaigner against wireless technology. After I was injured by X-rays in 1980, X-rays, I began to read everything I could get my hands on that had to do with electromagnetic radiation and its effects on life. And one of the first books I read was Paul Broder's The Zapping of America out of 1977. Won't read any more. The point is, he brings up the idea of phased arrays. When you have these antenna array systems spaced every so many feet, and you start arranging them, let's say like you go to the HARP system in Alaska and you see the big grid placement, that has the ability of being directional. That direction doesn't talk about you or look at you. It's looking at your devices. And so it will direct a beam of energy to the device. And you might be in between it. And it's much more powerful, as they're saying here, it can be much more powerful because it's directed energy, focused energy, than a general blanket of radiation. So this is another report you could bring out. I would say really research out, understand what you're talking about it, include this in all of this. Am I saying we don't want 5G? Well, I'm not. I'm looking at it saying it's not looking too good, but let's have the objective studies done. And let's make sure right now it is rolling out too fast. Notice that the statement from the appeal made by the concerned scientists in the EU, they were saying that they want to postpone the rollout. They're not even saying cut it out. They're saying let's slow down. One of the effects of having this increased access is now being told to us, as we said, the derogatory things that it's being used for. Again, profit motives are great here. We're not going to seemingly get around it. I don't know what that is, but that's what it is. People want to seemingly make money, and they don't care what they do and how they do it, or what the loopholes that they want to get around or policies that they violate in order to happen. And this 5G rolls out is one big policy violation in my mind to begin with. And yet no one seems to be wanting to focus on that. They'd rather complain about it or see how tough it might be to overcome. It looks like an inevitability, but I don't see it that way. And I don't think it's too much an optimistic view. I think there's formulaic things that are built into the system that are not being done, that once they get done will start to put the kibosh on how fast this thing rolls out, and maybe, depending on their actual findings, or the exposure to the lack of findings that are required, which I think is the answer, and that the people that are so-called the experts are not providing them, and so that the information to the agency is not adequate to make a decision. That may be your fastest route to slow this thing down while you're getting the information. Because if it is bad, we need to know about it. If it's not bad, we need to know about it. And if it's bad in a different way, we need to know about that. My problem with climate change. If it's Michael man-made, and it's these aluminum particles, you see how we screwed up? We started doing this stuff before that we were supposed to. The military starts doing it under the Title 50 of the United States of America, and it was the thing you were not supposed to do because there was no investigation under actual science. It was all politics. And so all these decisions and regulations are made, and there's policies made, and we've heard early on in this broadcast that the data, that these companies are using your data, they're selling your data to companies that want to exploit it for whatever reason. I'm not going to say good, bad, or indifferent. My sense is if you don't have it, they're not going to be able to exploit you so much. I don't have a phone, folks. I never, ever get a call from a casino. I never, ever get a call from a cruise ship line. I never get a call for a loan. Yeah, pretty cool, huh? My life's pretty simple that way. But those that you have a phone, those that have this stuff, those that are tied into a system. Here's a story. I gave a bounty hunter $300, and then he located our phone. Now, this is kind of a messed up story in a way, because the companies found out that it's a lineage of companies who misuse the policies of the provider, the telephone provider of information, of location. And the location has a problem in that it's not too accurate a lot of times. And the companies that are down the line of the reception of the information, whether or not they do it legally within the context of the contracts, are saying that this stuff is the fact, and then people who are getting a hold of the information are using it for reasons that weren't intended. And there's no control on this. And so this article was that a motherboard found out through a whistleblower, if you will, who does use that system, that this was going on, this misuse was going on, and so they did an investigation. The problem with the whole story is they actually got permission from the guy who had the phone who they tracked, which would have complied with all the things I read in the story that everyone said had to happen. You have to have consent about the fact of the tracking. They have to know about this, and then it's okay. Well, they got that. And yet, in the end result, the companies are all up in arms about how that wasn't supposed to happen. Well, that's a lie, because if you look at what happened, apparently they got permission and consent just like everybody was supposed to do in the line. So what's happening is they kind of overreacted here, the AT&Ts and all the Verizons. They overreacted. They've been selling this stuff and been doing it just like they've been told. And you read the article, and they've been doing this. So they can track you down. People who you don't even know. People who aren't even contracted with the telephone providers have access to information to find out where you are. And maybe right down to within a few hundred meters. And maybe even closer. And without your knowledge and without you understanding why they're looking, is something I want you to understand about how the world becomes in the future when they roll out data acquisition under 5G, where I told you become data radar. Remember the X-rays, now we got radar, the Google patent, in a ring. I'm sure they'll make it into a ring where you can manipulate all your data, all your hardware with this radar, like a mouse. It acts like a mouse. It actually emanates a field, tells you right where you are. Your phone is emanating a field. Your distortion of that field identifies you. And when they take the phased array and they point it in your general direction, they can read about anything they need from you. At least that you're there, where you are. This all happens in real time, not kind of like what they're doing now within a minute or two, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But so here's the notice to us. The information on your phone is being used right now. It's been being used. The people can be looking for you, and you won't even have a clue it is, and then it could be wrong. I don't know if I have the story up. You could be wrong. We find out that all these location places that you look on maps, or those that use the maps and the map services, that's all gone through a government military operation who just makes up where this stuff is, where this most important things are. I don't remember now if I got the story of it. house, somebody in the house. People coming to their house thinking that the location, the geolocation that was in the maps on the databases was where their stolen phone was, where the body was in the backyard, buried in the backyard, where the terrorist was at, where whatever was going on, someone was looking in. The database that was being used wasn't so keen on keeping accuracy, and so there's numbers of houses throughout the world. It's just not just one space. That people in the world are being adversely affected by wrong data, and they don't know why, and they can't fight it. Now, to the company's credit on that issue, they tried to get it fixed, and they finally did get it fixed. But this is an anomaly. This is the anomaly that peaks up already before you start getting into this technology. That what starts to happen when you have a more complex network of these signals, which we moved up to satellites and all this other stuff as well. It's layered surveillance. So they got frequencies all over. They have frequencies coming off of everything. They're looking at your distortion fields. And then I ran across this little story. It's actually a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I can't get to the stuff all in time. But it seems to be good enough now. But AI can now decode words directly from brain waves. You don't think that they tune inductively or by any synthesis that they now are developing with all this technology that you're handing them, that you buy, you put on your body, that they now can have an artificial intelligence, a pattern recognition system working at the speed of a computer, whatever the computer speed is, or the matrix of a bunch of computers, can now decode words directly from your brain waves. Think about this carefully. Don't just pass it. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Well, that's kind of scary. No, think how scary this is. Given, and then again, it's in its formative moments, but it's going to be expanded quickly. I suggest to you that they can decode words from your brain waves because you are emanating these signals, body electric. If they can decode your words from your brain waves. Now, first we have to rely on the AI being accurate, which we don't know if it is or not, but someone else is going to rely on it, presumptively against you, what they think, and then that they can do that. That means that they're taking away your right to be silent with third-party technology that you agreed to. If they can do, AI can now decode your brainwaves for words, they can take away your right to remain silent. Those of you in Generation Z, 30, 40 years from now, think about how we messed up and how we put that on you. And it doesn't stop there. If they can't do it by the brainwaves, they're doing it by photons. And I think I might have gotten that last story a while back, and this one, I think, from Jules, if not Gary L. But at any rate, thank you, Jules, for what you do over there at UCY, continuing to put the broadcast up, and I think it's going live simulcast. Still, thank you. But Scope Advance gives first look through all cortical layers of the awake brain. So it's not just going to be brain waves, it's actually going to be light that they can reach out and look at someone. Doctors look, just like doctors seek to scan the deeper into the body with sonograms, CTs, MRIs, the astronomers seek to look farther out in the universe with space-based telescopes, adaptive optics, and different wavelengths of light. Neuroscientists pursue new ways to watch brain cells at work deep inside the brain. The 3-photon microscopy recently emerged to give them a deeper look at brain cells than ever before. They can shoot a beam of light, and I don't understand the lab technique and research, but just get the point. They can shoot a particular type of light at your brain. They can now go into and focus in on the structure of it, and they can be looking at what's going on the neurons. And what was important in my mind is they say they had to tune it so that they got to a point where it stopped the interrogation, stopped interfering with the neuron signaling. And so that tells me they already know how to interfere with your neuron signaling with light. And now they've figured out how to interrogate you without you knowing it or affecting what your brain neurons do. So we don't necessarily need to even have anything electronic emanating a field, or even we'll use it in conjunction. They'll they'll identify who you are. They eventually will shoot a certain type of light into your head or wherever. You can do it in any cell, I'm sure. Once they find the fractal resonance of your system, as they have indicated that they probably already have, then they're going to be able to figure things out. They're taking away your right to be silent, your right not to associate, your right to be free, and they're doing it without you even knowing it. And so heads up. Those of you in Generation Z 20, 30 years from now, I'm sorry. Don't know what else I could have done. Right? What are they doing, folks? They're just waiting for you to incriminate yourself. I've told you and explained to you that they'll make that stuff up. And they'll make that stuff up, and they'll try to get around it, and they'll enforce and empower themselves because everybody was quiet when they violated, gave lip service to the rights that you were supposed to assert and not let them trespass. Because we were told it took a vigilant, educated mass to do that. And we haven't. We've lost the republic, the Republican form, the things that where the law meant something. It's coming into these legalisms because we're not understanding certain things. So we have technology coming, folks. It's just going to be hands-off. You're just going to be in an area. They're going to be able to read your mind. They'll actually, what I got out of that, too, they're going to be able to tune their thing up, and they'll be able to put a neuron, they'll be able to put in signaling into your neurons and do whatever, have you do whatever they want, it seems, by what I was reading in that article. And where you think that they don't have power or this or that, they're going to invent the power. I've been telling you this. This comes from Normalization of Ignorance. Thank you for this. I didn't know anything about it. But police, and this is a warning to y'all up in Canuckistan. Police in Canada can now demand breath samples in bars and at home. It may sound unbelievable, but the Canuckistanians' revised laws on impaired driving could see police demand breath samples from people in bars, restaurants, or even at home. And if you say no, you could be arrested, face a criminal record, ordered to pay a fine, and subjected to a driving suspension. Now here's the point about all this. You can listen to how this is coming down. It exists for 2 hours after the report that you may have been doing a drunk driving. In other words, you can go home completely sober, go in, have a couple beers watching a football game. Yeah, even the one that got you used your feet with a funny ball. Yeah, that one. And after 2 hours, right before 2 hours, a cop shows up, knocks on the door. You open it because you don't require a warrant, and they ask you to blow. And if you don't, they're going to get you. And if you do, and you've been drinking, even though you weren't drunk when you were driving, they'll get you. So the presumption of guilt is on you, and the presumption of burden is on you. And this is what they're doing. This is how they're going to be working. And I hear nothing from people other than now we know about it here. But the suggestion was don't open the door. And that was interesting. And a question came back is, what about the castle doctrine? I think that's immaterial. That's a common law defensive condition that the common law should be applicable, but it's not material before the cop comes in and without a warrant. And then you're subject to the risk of reliance on that and the corruption in the system, which doesn't want you to have a right. But up in Canuckistan, you can be required to blow 2 hours after you've been in a car. And so the idea is you got to get to your house without being seen, and then don't answer the door, demand a warrant. And I would say for the time being, you also better have an attorney on top that you'll have them contact so that you can enforce your law. You don't want to communicate with them at the door. You want to go quietly behind, call your lawyer and say you need to call the cops and you need to talk to them about the warrant they need. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope something I said gives you some insight, inspiration. Get out there and help us out, help you out. And thank you, Grimman, for what you do at reallibertymedia.com. Everybody else that does the shares, the follow, the shakes, the share, whatever, all that stuff. I do appreciate all that. And I'll be with you next week, tech diffs or nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.